Hello, everyone. This is Frank DeFreitas, and welcome to another week of HoloTalk for the week of April 12th, 1998. Our special guest this week is Steve Provence from Blue Ridge Holographics. If you are a new listener, welcome aboard. This week, HoloTalk begins transmission of its broadcast to your computer with Real Audio server software, which opens up the show to millions of other listeners who could not access the show before because you needed Real Audio software, I believe 4.0 and 5.0. This opens it up to everyone else with the earlier versions as well. So if you're listening to HoloTalk for the first time, welcome aboard. We're going to get to the Steve Provence interview in just a moment. Next week, I'm going to have a guest, Todd Stark, who is Director of Exhibits and Education at the Discovery Center of Science and Technology, and he's going to fill us in on the new traveling exhibit that's coming to the center here in Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton area from Pacific Science Center called Lasers and Holograms. So we're going to do a short interview with him next week. That'll go up on Sunday night, so don't forget to stop by and listen to that. Okay, I'm not going to come back on after the Steve Provence interview is completed. It's an interview that runs about 25 minutes, so what I'll do right now is just thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you come back as a listener week after week. So this is Frank DeFreitas from HoloTalk, and here's the Steve Provence interview. Hello.
Hi, Frank.
Steve.
Steve.
How you doing?
I'm doing quite all right.
So let's start out. There's a question I've had for you, and I want to ask you. This show's been on since November, and I think you're probably the first person that's actually a professional holographer that has a company that's manufacturing holograms that I've had on here. Here's a question for you. There's a lot of kids that listen to this show. They listen to it in their schools. They listen to it in their home computers. Now, if you could give them some tips, would you advise them to someday get involved with the field of holography, or wouldn't you do that?
It depends on what kind of animal you've got.
Mm-hmm.
Holography's attracted a lot of flakes over the year.
Yeah.
There's just something about bright lights,
yeah.
you know? There's been an awful lot of flaky people, but what it takes to have fun in holography is just creative desire.
Mm-hmm.
That most people who ever saw holograms knew at the first instant they ever saw a hologram that they wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just a mild curiosity. It was quite an inspirational event, a small epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
When they first saw a good hologram, and that drives those who will be driven, to learn how to do it. But there's three different ways anybody in any imaging field goes about making a living out of being a creator in any medium. Is you kind of end up being part artist, part scientist,
mm-hmm.
and part businessman. And that's where a lot of the longevity among various players in the field has kind of fallen apart. There's some very talented artists
in
the field, but they don't have a lick of business sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some excellent scientists who are unable to convey any emotion into the technical exercise
yes.
of creating a hologram.
Yes.
And there are a lot of businessmen who may have, pure greed, profit, ground floor of a new industry in mind, who don't have a sufficient appreciation for the science end or the art end.
Mm-hmm.
And those three worlds of art, science, and business have often been in collision in the field of holography. It's a communication media.
Yes.
It ain't no special animal. I'm
mm-hmm.
in Virginia. I can say ain't.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a way of informing people. Now, we happen to be more in the commercial end.
Mm-hmm.
So we're typically trying to inform people about, to be candid, a company's vanity,
mm-hmm.
that they have arrived.
Yes.
They're with it.
And how to show that through holography.
Yes, they'll use holography because it is new and exciting as a vehicle to promote their view of themselves, that they themselves are innovative and look at things different ways. And so it's a good reflection on companies who use it. But it's a communication tool as far as it's being used for us, and also with the good artists.
I've had a few people on the show that were involved with the education end, and they said that they wouldn't recommend kids look into it as a job choice. And, I know there's not much of an industry out there, but, these kids are in 8th grade, and they love holography, they love lasers, they collect holograms, and someday they'd like to grow up and go out into the field, develop some hard skills as far as how to run the equipment and produce the holograms, and bring some soft skills along with it, as far as creative thinking and the thought process. And I just can't see sometimes, shutting them off like that to tell them no, it wouldn't be a good choice.
There's not a need to shut them off, but, there's levels of passion that relate to anything. And holography is a really good comparison. And anybody listening has probably met people who are audiophiles, into the very high-end, ultimate sound systems for which they can invest, tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes, easily.
To chase down that final 1% of noise-free, high fidelity.
Yes.
Whereas you can go down to Walmart and for $99, pick yourself up a sound system that will allow you to have a rudimentary appreciation of music.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does become a level of passion. The one neat thing about holography, although the entry ante, because there are few studios. I mean, you've got a learning studio.
Mm-hmm.
There's some out in San Francisco that teach courses. Jeff Murray's group.
Yeah.
Jason Sapan in New York City, I believe, still teaches. But the number of hands-on educators to a person wanting to take a course is kind of limited.
Yes, it is.
And in the university environment, it's generally taught just as a peripheral segment to other studies, typically in the physics department.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to run into a lot of physics professors who are going to pick up pom-poms and steer people towards a career in holography.
Yeah.
They find it to be an interesting teaching vehicle. But, you can play in the game for, somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000, to build the basic, old Jerry Pethick, Lloyd Cross, initiation system.
Mm-hmm.
The sandbox,
Yeah.
the least expensive grade Edmund lenses, and get a rudimentary understanding. But you stand in front of a very impressive Margaret Binion piece and look at your dark green 2x2 inch reflection hologram, you're going to get a complex.
Mm-hmm.
There's a much higher stakes of ante. Unfortunately, around the world, the universities harbor the type of equipment, that can be available to students, high-end equipment.
Yeah.
And in the private sector, it's a lot more limited. It used to be a lot more open in this field from a informative educational point of view, as well as an open door policy for people who were anxious to learn and become involved before anybody made a buck.
Yeah.
The dollar reared its ugly head, and all of a sudden, all this real free-flowing information somehow closed up. Sometime about the early 80s, that, when the dollar appeared into the scene, people got a lot more tight-mouthed where they used to things became proprietary. They used to be considered discovery, and that cast a different light.
Did you think we would be further along in holography than what we are today, and why aren't we where we thought we would be today? Do you have any feelings on that?
It's primarily greed.
Greed.
Yeah. Like I say, when money started to appear, patents became weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a mere acknowledgement of who thought this up first, right? They became weapons to try to beat away and stifle innovation and competition, because there were dollars at stake, and as soon as the Visa card came around, that pretty much set the whole game off. There was big money at stake in protecting the patents.
Do you do mostly embossed holography there?
We do not emboss. We do origination exclusively for embossed holograms, photoresist masters.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Blue Ridge while we have everyone's attention, and I wanted to let everyone know that there's a link to Blue Ridge Holographic's website that will be on the HoloTalk page, and you just click on that link. You don't have to sit there and stare at your screen while you're listening to the show, because the real audio player will play in the background while you visit their website. So why don't you go now and click on that link, and Steve's going to tell us a little bit about what you're going to find there and what they do.
Well, we didn't design our own website, but I think it came out pretty okie-dokie.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, Blue Ridge is sort of a multiple entendre. Originally, the company, since '83, had been Steve Provence Holography.
Mm-hmm.
And we started in the Santa Cruz Mountains, old Doobie Brothers country, up above Santa Cruz. And the earthquake started driving us kind of crazy. And also, I had a long-time associate, Nelson Poe, who's still with me, who, the earthquakes were killing us.
Wow.
And not out of fear of dying, but when you wake up and see a $70,000 laser teetering on the edge of a table, ready to would have crashed with one more tremor, you realize how fragile your livelihood is.
Yeah.
I watched a 1,700-pound Newport table literally dance across the laboratory floor.
Wow.
During the Loma Prieta quake.
Was that your lab that got hard hit out there? Did I read about? I think it might have been in Holography News or something. They said one of the labs were just completely destroyed.
I think Light Impression
took
it on the chin with a bunch of stuff falling over. We've been pretty fortunate. It was just minor stuff. Some clean benches crashed and HEPA filters got poked through and stuff like that. But it wasn't those events that actually spooked us from, working in quake country. It was the bloody aftershocks. Because a lot of the shots we do record, 7 or 8 different elements, or channels, all done in a sequence, tightly registered sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, 1 out of 7, for no explainable reason, the shot wouldn't come out.
Yeah.
Now, photoresist, as you may know, is a very slow, very insensitive animal. So it pushes exposure times up into the minutes range instead of the seconds range. And frankly, after you'd spent, 6 hours getting through a sequence of 13 individual recordings on a single plate, only to find that one of them dropped out because some little tremor you couldn't even feel had mucked it up, you'd have to start all over. And after having to do every job 2 or 3 times to get lucky enough to avoid a miss, we just sort of said, this is counterproductive. So we loaded up the truck and we moved from Beverly and came over to the Blue Ridge Mountains,
Wow.
Which is gorgeous here, Charlottesville, Virginia. It's stable. These are the oldest mountains in the whole country.
Yeah.
They ain't going nowhere. And frankly, the costs of electricity, of which we consume quite a bit, and the availability of water, of which we consume quite a bit, and also prices for real estate were much more favorable than they were in California. So we're Blue Ridge because we're right here in the bosom of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
What type
We're Blue Ridge because we work with blue light and we make ridges and grooves.
Oh, cool. That's cool. What kind of jobs do you take on from people? If someone was listening to the show and they were thinking in the back of their mind, I'd like to have a couple holograms done or something. What type of jobs do you do for clients?
Well, embossed is primarily a mass production medium. So it doesn't really work out for people who say, hey, it'd be great to have a custom embossed hologram on a couple hundred of my business cards.
Mm-hmm.
The person who picked up that ball and ran with it is Peter Shire,
yeah.
82,000, who you can link to off of my site.
Mm-hmm. He's going to be a guest coming up, I think, in maybe 4 weeks, on Low Run Productions.
Yeah. Peter filled an interesting niche. That he can accommodate people who need fewer than a couple thousand pieces of something.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done jobs where, to be candid, the mastering nut, runs around $4,000 or $5,000 to get these things done. Then, in order to get a nickel die, to print the things, you're looking at another $500 to $1,000 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of, $5,000 to $7,000 ante involved, you're going to want to print a few of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Because once you've got that tooling out of the way, you're dealing with very inexpensive printing. But for small quantities, it doesn't work. We've done a few vanity things for some companies who had some big managers meeting, and they really wanted to impress the socks off them, and would do it for enough brochures to cover a few hundred people coming to a meeting. But that level of corporate vanity is few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, they're used for annual reports, things that are in the neighborhood of 30, 40, 50,000 units and up, and more and more and more. Small security labels, they're everywhere.
Yeah,
the dog bones on.
Like you're doing a lot of those in Asia.
And, foreign, things like bus passes and just little authenticity items.
Mm-hmm.
But we're primarily a custom house. We are not any longer in the stock image sales business. So we're typically dealing with agencies, and we have a very effective broker network, and we're on very good terms with the great majority of foil embossers around the world. And that's primarily where our things come from. Most people start with their printer, and their printer doesn't know exactly where to go, so they go to their foil supplier.
Mm-hmm.
And their foil supplier leads them to a designer or directly to us.
Yeah.
And that's where the majority of work comes from. And we stay quite busy during certain seasons, and it's not just a seasonal animal. You never know what's going to go on. Sometimes when the economy is ripping, people don't feel they need to advertise as much because business is going great without it. Sometimes when there's a recession, people feel they need to advertise even more.
Sure, yeah.
But it's a very interesting. I can't. Back to one of your original questions. Would you recommend someone get into holography? Not just holography, but any independent business is like a yo-yo, and you've got to have a pretty hard stomach for it.
Oh yeah.
It's a roller coaster ride.
It certainly is. It's feast and famine.
It is, and some people just ain't got the mental stamina. Certainly when you're in what's trying to be stable relationships, wife and kids and stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to make people understand, the ups and downs and lack of regularity, present in holography, which I think is especially a volatile field.
What's your take on the state of holography right now? I know in your email you said you had a few comments you'd like to make on holography in general, so the floor is yours.
Well, let's see. I guess a couple of the things are. I think I'd already gone over the greed factor. That's the one part that bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just the nature of business. There sure have been a lot of lawsuits out there, and those are rather disheartening. But again, that's just an indication that somebody has something worth protecting.
Yeah.
It's the nature of that beast. I hate to see a lot of holographic talent turn themselves into attorneys.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, when people are talking about discovery, and they're not talking about a new image they've got in mind, they're talking about
litigation,
some phase of a criminal trial that they're involved in.
That speaks volumes in itself.
Yeah. I'll throw out one thing. I have pretty strong opinions about a lot of players in the field, and I said, look, there's frequently been enough bad blood among people, players in the industry. But I did want to point out, in case somebody says, gee, Provence doesn't really seem to respect anybody, that there are two people, pretty much only, in my opinion, who deserve any admiration or respect in this industry. Take a guess. Who would I pick?
Oh.
Coming from an embossing recording guy's point of view, who would you think I would have the most respect for?
The first name that comes to mind with me would be McGrew.
Who?
No?
I think I was just referring to him in the people becoming attorneys.
Oh, okay.
Creators. No, I'll go ahead.
He's the name I've always heard the story when he was down in Norristown.
Right.
When before he even went out to the West Coast and the whole thing that they were doing down there with what the heck was the name of the company that the Goldbergs had down there, and Scott Mensow was involved with that company. This was back in the early days. Holex, exactly. Yeah. So his was the name that I always associated with it right from the very beginning because I'm just north of Norristown.
Right.
So that's why that name came.
Well, a lot of people that some of the first ones you run into are not always the ones you stick with.
Yeah.
No, I'd have to say rather than the guessing game, the two people I most admire in this field are Ken Haynes, formerly of American Banknote, and I'm not sure if currently, but with Simeon, that he's always been a brilliant innovator who sort of led the pack in new methods of doing things with holograms, especially relating to mass production. And Michael Foster, who I probably would be remiss in not putting down as, a genius. He was the first person to ever make an embossed hologram.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, back the old Museum of Holography back in New York, back when they were on 20th Street, had a little sample case or gift case, things to sell, and they had embossed holograms of things like the scuba diver and a really neat multi-channel Superman comic that Mike Foster had made, I think, as early as 72.
I saw that Superman piece. I think they had that in one of the display cases. They had that there permanently for a while.
Well, they used to sell them. They'd sell them for about $10, and they were hand pulled.
And yeah, where did he do that, man? Do you have his own facility in New York or something? Or?
No. Foster was, I think at the time he was teamed up with Rich Rollison.
Oh, okay.
Out in Utah.
Yeah.
And then later in Los Angeles. But Foster's soft embossing methods are radically advanced compared to most other embossing methods. I wish we could do more business with them because they really look good.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a chemist. That's primarily his background.
I see.
But a darn good holographer too. But those are really the two people I'd put at the top. There's been a whole lot of people that I don't know. I guess I could fault. There's always been, because of the equipment expense and the risk of high-end holography. There's been a lot of people who've only made a go of holography with what I call a sugar daddy mentality.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it on my own. I won't start small. I need a partner.
Yeah.
I need somebody else's money in order to afford this, and I'll bring them in as a partner, and we'll make a business of it. And there's been a lot of wrong marriages along the line when somebody had the money and somebody else had the desire and skill. It's been sort of unfortunate. There's a few self-made people. It's easy to be jealous of the educators because of all the equipment at their disposal.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't buy it.
Yeah, it's all grant.
They didn't buy it. Yeah, it's all grant, and I don't know. We've sort of prided ourselves in being bootstrap kind of guys.
Yeah. Are you still there?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
Sorry for the pregnant pause.
I went through it the same way, with my studio. I mean, I'm over at Lehigh University now. We just opened the Science Museum. I had, a couple hundred kids this weekend for holography already. It's
That's
on
great,
Tuesday.
by the way. You're one of the hardest working guys in show business.
Well,
I mean, you cover a lot of bases, and there's been a lot of gaps created over the years between gallery closures, the museum itself.
Yeah.
The number of schools that do carry courses, following through with education, broadening people's information base, and now you're taking it into the web. I have to compliment your enterprise.
Well, thank you very much. There's been a lot of kids that have moved on. My daughter, who just started college this year, my oldest daughter's a physics major. And her physics professor is a student that I had in the early 80s that started out with learning about lasers and came into the studio and made some holograms. She's married with her own kids now, and she's still got the holograms on the wall. But it's going generation to generation now. And that's, and the whole reason for this show was basically just to fill a void of information, just give people an opportunity like yourself, a chance, to come on here and say what it is you're doing. In an informal way where people can log on and listen to what's happening with holography, because it's so hard to get any information about what's happening.
That's true. Well, I'll give you a basic life truth. Applies to everything other than holography, too. You only learn stuff solidly by making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And the brevity of a holography course is unfortunate because there's so much information to absorb that there could be a tendency to be spoon-fed and take what the teacher has to say as an absolute law.
Yeah.
Do it this way. Whereas some of the most innovative work in holography ever done basically resulted from learning something from the freedom to make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's changed the course of imaging so many times. Rudy Burkout, you think he just envisioned the way some of his things came out?
Yeah, I know.
I think there was a whole series of happy accidents and boxes of ruined plates before Rudy got the look he got.
Yeah.
And everything we've figured out about this game, we've basically figured out by trial and error and making a lot of mistakes. Now, I'll throw one other tip out for any student or amateur, which is don't take everything your teacher says as an absolute. I would recommend to all novices to throw away the beam splitter. every explanation of holography I've ever heard says, take your laser, split the beam into two parts with a beam splitter.
Yeah.
And I think you've created a fundamental problem right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Low-powered lasers, you've just wasted a lot of light.
Yeah.
And actually, if people could practice, and I think they'd find great results in stability, conservation of the amount of light they had, and decreased exposure times by using a shear beam technique, where you remember that a spread-out, expanded beam through an objective is as many parts as you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to take a mirror and let one part of it be reference, grab another mirror, and let it illuminate a subject.
Mm-hmm.
But take that little piece of glass that's a beam splitter and put it in a drawer for a while. You know?
Yeah. All right. Well, Steve, I want to thank you for being a guest, taking the time out, for the listeners that log on for the show.
I appreciate it very much.
And we're going to cut it off now because we try to keep the file sizes as small as possible. This will probably wind up being close to 2 megs as the file size.
Now you're going to have to edit the heck out of this.
No editing. You'll go up every word you said is worth $1 million, so we keep every word in.
Oh, all right. Well, before everybody starts yawning, we'll have to say goodnight.
All right, Steve. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Frank.
And look forward to talking to you again.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.